Hey folks, welcome back. So this is Bennett Science, but there's not really a whole lot of science in this video. So if you're a regular and you're looking for a science video, I'll forgive you if you skip this one. This one, I've been living a little different career for the last 6 months here. I'm doing the data analysis stuff for my district now. And we recently went 1-to-1, so every student has either an iPad or a MacBook now. And that required some fairly quick and adaptive thinking in terms of how we were going to record all these checkouts of devices. I ended up needing to figure out a way to print off a bunch of barcodes. So I've been dealing with these things, these label sheets. This one's from Avery. And needing to find a way to print a whole bunch of barcodes to that in a fairly short time. A mail merge using Excel and Word works really well if you're going to do a whole bunch of them at once, and if you don't mind screwing around with some weird font issues and some hidden characters that pop up. And now, if you're doing 12,000 of these things in bulk, then fixing all those little formatting errors once and then printing for a couple hours at a time, it's not a huge deal. But if you're doing small batches of these, 20 or 30 of them at a time, it's a lot of time spent just fixing formatting things every single time you want to print this. So I figured out a way to do this all in Google Sheets with just a couple of formulas and some of the built-in functionality for Google Sheets. I steered away from barcode fonts just because they seem not always to work, not always to read very well. And Google Docs gets some of the same formatting errors with extra characters and stuff. So I wanted to steer away from that and use images of barcodes, but something that I could generate basically automatically. I haven't seen this method anywhere else, so I think I'm the one who developed this. If nothing else, I rediscovered the wheel. So let me show you what I came up with here. So what you might have seen before is something like this, where you can type in a barcode value, and those for code 39 barcode have asterisks at the beginning and end. And then you can change the font to this Libre barcode 39. And if it doesn't show up on yours, you just need to go to the More Fonts option and type in barcode. Oops. And you get a few different options here. So you got code 39 and code 128 barcodes. With a few variations of the 39. We were doing everything in 39. You'll notice that there aren't any other barcode options here, which probably isn't a huge deal. But there's also no QR code option, which is not great. And there are a number of other barcode formats. So if you're looking for more flexibility, the barcode fonts they can't all do it. And so barcodes sometimes are just transcribed one character at a time. They are on the 39. But not on others, and so that gives you some problems sometimes. So I can change the font on that to this Libre 30 barcode 39, and then we end up with this just a barcode, and it looks about like you'd expect there. So it works usually most of the time, as long as you want the code 39 or the code 128. But we're going to do this in a little different way now. So there are a bazillion of these barcode generators out. So this one's on generator.onbarcode.com, but there are a bunch of these things, and they all work in about the same way. So this one also lets you choose between 39 and the 39 extension one, and that's what I'm going to be using here, but there are a bunch of options down here for other variations on this. I'm going to make a barcode, and I'm going to change what's printed there. The code 39 seems only to work with capital letters, so I'm using all capital letters. Data goes here, and I'm going to generate a barcode, and then I'm going to right-click on that barcode that gets made and open image in new tab. Now if you look at the URL, you see that my data goes here actually shows up in the URL. And it turns out that if I change that, new data, I get a new barcode with the new data input into it. So that's the only thing that needs to change on this URL. It'll take it through whatever process it's using to generate a barcode using your new data if I just change that one little spot right there. And that's what we're going to use in our Google Sheets. So I'm going to copy that whole link and I put that in here. And there's a formula in Google Sheets just called image. And this just looks up an image by its URL. So I'm going to put in quotation marks and then paste the image, end my quotation marks, and end my function. And so we'll see here that we get that new data image showing up. Now if I say newer data, if I put that in here, I can actually change this function so it looks to see whatever's in A2 and uses that data. So let me find new data. There we go. New data. So I want to get rid of that. I'm going to actually break this into two separate strings. And then in between those, I'm going to use the concatenate function, which is just the ampersand and sign. And I want to look at whatever is in A2. And we can see I get newer data there. And if I change that, I get different data there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I get a barcode that matches. So everything is going to be based on that same functionality here, where we look up this URL, but with the data that we're looking for plugged into that place. So I have a student list prepared here, where I've got student numbers for each one of these folks, and then every one of these cells is going to be using that URL. That image function with that URL, and I've just got the student number plugged in there. The other thing that I've done on this is I actually have this formula filled way down, but I have it set up so that if this cell is blank, then it's just going to show me a blank there. So that's what these ones are. Actually, I guess that's not true, but there we go. So now these ones down here all show up as blank because this cell is blank. But if I add a new student, 456, we end up with a new barcode there. All right, now I've got all the barcodes, but this isn't a format that would work for printing onto these label sheets. So next what we need to do is we need to make a sheet that's set up, that's formatted so that all of our labels will print out onto it. So I'm going to make a new sheet here, and I'm just going to measure the dimensions of this sheet and make my cells fit with that. So I have measured this one out already, and I found that the margins top and bottom are about 1/2 inch and side to side are about 0.2 inches. So I'm going to set the margins first. That's in the print menu. Over here, margins, we're going to go to custom numbers. I want to make this print as a portrait. Top and bottom will be 0.5. Left and right will be 0.2. Okay, and I'll go through next, but that's just to make sure that it saves. And then cancel this. So my margins are set. Now I need to get each one of these squares to be the right size for the label. So each of those labels are 1 inch high. Now if I go through, there's 10 rows. If I go through here and say resize rows and make it 1, well, it's not going to work here. It says it has to be between 2 and 2000, but that doesn't make sense if this is in inches, because we know that we can print it at smaller than 2 inches. It looks like my units here are in pixels. Now the rendering that Google Sheets uses is such that 96 pixels is equivalent to 1 inch. So if it's 1 inch high, I'll just go with 96 pixels. I've also got 3 columns, except there's a little bit of a gap on these ones from one label to the next. And so I'll just measure those ones to figure out how big each of those needs to be. So I've got A and then a little bit of a gap. So this would be my first, this would be this column, will be column A. And this is going to be column C with a little tiny column B in between, and then a little column D and a big column E again. So highlight these 3 and go to resize selected columns, and I need to figure out how big these are. So when I measure these ones, I come up with about 2 5/8 inches. So let's figure out what that is in pixels. 2.625 is the same as 2 5/8 times, and it's 96 pixels per inch. So that's 252 pixels wide for those ones. So let's make that 252. Okay, and then these little skinny ones, the gap between those is about 1/8 of an inch. And so if I do well, it's 96, 1/8 of 96 is 12 pixels. Oops, didn't get that one. Size 12. There we go. Okay, so from here I can just say equals and then go back to my barcode and put that in. And it'll print the barcode in there. But I'd actually like to have some text in these as well. And so that's going to complicate this a little bit. What I would normally do if I weren't working with the barcodes is I would just concatenate whatever text I want in there. So make it into one big string with some carriage returns in there so it shows up on multiple lines. Unfortunately, with the images, that won't actually work. So that's actually going to mean I need to take this one label and break it into 2 separate pieces. So I'm going to go every other row here. I actually need, instead of 10 rows, I'm going to need 20 rows. And since I didn't resize anything before, I'm going to go ahead and resize everything. And we said those were 96 pixels high to begin with, except this time I'm going to leave about 2/3 of the space for text and 1/3 at the bottom for the barcode. So let's just call it 60 pixels for the text section. And then beneath that, rows 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20 are going to be the rest of that space. So I made those ones 60 initially. It needs to be 96 altogether, so 36 pixels high. Okay, so now I need to fill in each of these rows, and this is going to be a little bit of manual work on this. It doesn't automate super nicely just because my data is top to bottom, but I really want to go over 3 and then jump down a line and then go over 3 and then jump down a line. And then I'll do the same thing for barcodes. So it's not going to work out automatically super nicely on this one, but there's a little trick here. I'm actually going to work in a blank space over here. I'm going to do my data first, so I'm going to do equals, my data for the written text rather, and I'll start with my student name. And then I'll do the and sign and a quotation. I'm going to do a little string here, and the string is just going to have a carriage return. Now if I just hit enter, it thinks I'm done with the formula. So I don't want that. Instead, I want to do control enter, and that lets me do a carriage return. And then I'll end my string. And on the next line, I'm going to do the teacher name. There we go. And then connect that to another carriage return, so quote mark, control enter, that's command enter on a Mac, and then a quotation mark again, and then and we'll go ahead and do the student number there, and call that good. Okay, so if I drag this down, see it's 30 different cells that I'm going to be doing all together. And we've got all of those entered. So now I can just move these over to the appropriate spot. So we can do Control X and Control V to copy and paste those. Or you can also select this and then go to the top or bottom of that selected cell and drag it wherever you want it. So either way works just fine. We can cut and paste. Until all of these are filled in with the formulas that we want. And you'll notice that I'm leaving a line in between. That's where the barcodes are going to go for each of these. Okay, now got all my text in there. Now I need to get the barcodes in, and I'm going to do the same kind of thing that I did before, where I'll put them all into these dummy spaces and then drag them over, because we're going to have exactly the same problem otherwise. Earlier, I actually made the barcodes here, so I could just reference that cell directly, but the other thing I could do is just put this formula on this sheet. Otherwise, I'm sort of doing double duty, but it doesn't really matter too much on this one, I suppose. So I'm just going to do equals and then select that barcode here. If I drag that down, or fill that down rather, I've got 30 of them again. Now I have all my barcodes, different sizes because of the different row heights right now, and I can drag those over, copy and paste those into place. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, everything's in. Last thing I want to do is make sure I'm happy with the formatting, so I'm going to go ahead and center everything. And that should be good to go. So let's go ahead and print this, and I'm going to print a test sheet first, just on normal paper, and make sure that lines up nicely with my label paper. And probably what will happen here is it might get a little shy about the lack of margins, or about the measurements that I made. So we may have to make some little adjustments here. So let's see what this looks like. So I'll go to print. All right, and it looks like everything's on there right now. And there's a couple of things that I want to check. First off, I'm on portrait. The scale right now is set to width, which means that if it thinks that it's too wide, it's going to compress it a little bit, both horizontally and vertically. Now, I don't want that because I was very careful about measuring this to make sure that it actually was going to fit onto my labels. If it gets compressed, it's not going to print on the labels, right? So I'm going to go ahead and change this to normal, or 100%. And what we end up with here is our labels don't fit on the page, or at least Google thinks they don't fit on the page. So I'm going to just mess with these side margins a little bit. It looks like vertically it fits just fine, but horizontally is an issue on this. So I'm going to take this down. Let's try 0.18 on both sides. Okay, and we'll try 0.16. And now everything fits onto the page. So I think we're probably okay on this one. But I'm going to go ahead and do a test print. One thing I want to make sure I have on here is the show grid lines on this, and that way I can just hold up the paper to the label sheet, make sure that the grid lines indicating where it thinks the outside of the labels are going to be actually line up with that. So I'm going to go ahead and print, and I want to make sure that when I get to the printer dialog box that I end up with the scale coming up to 100%. So I'm going to manually set that as custom 100%. That way it doesn't automatically mess with the scale on this, trying to be helpful and end up screwing up my, my work on formatting this. So I'll go ahead and print and do a quick comparison. Okay, so I've got my sheet, and I'm just going to hold it up here and make sure that we line up the tops of the two pages, and I'm going to check the line on the grid with the edge of the label here. And I know you can't see that very well here, so you just have to take my word for it that that seems to line up pretty well all the way down. And you do want to check all the way down to the bottom. And then I'll do the same thing for the horizontal alignment. I'm going to make sure that the two edges of the paper are lined up. And I'm going to check the alignment on those horizontal edges, and those all look to line up pretty well too. So I feel okay then about sticking this one into the printer and doing a print on this. Since I am printing onto the labels this time, I've checked the alignment. The only thing I'm going to change is I don't need the grid lines anymore. So let's kill that from our formatting. And we'll give it a shot and cross our fingers. All right, got our labels printed out here, and I'm just going to check to make sure that we don't have any overlap where the printing goes from one label onto another. And these ones look good all the way across. So I'm going to go ahead and peel one off just to use as a demo here. So we got a nice print on that one. And the ultimate test, of course. Let's plug in our scanner, see what it gets. Moment of truth. So student number on this is 44609. 44609! Beautiful. All right, now, there admittedly was a fair amount of setup on this one, but the beautiful thing about this is that now I can just clear out all of this data, and as soon as I type in a new name, Andrew Bennett, and teacher name Mr. Smith, and my student number, of course, is 12345, I get a barcode generated here, and let's see, I'm the third one down, so that should be the top right up here, and indeed we've got this all set up and ready to print. So all I have to do then is copy and paste the student name, teacher name, and student number in these spots, and everything else happens automatically. All I got to do is hit print on this one. Now, just as an example, I also put together a sheet where instead of printing a two-dimensional barcode, I printed a QR code, and I did that one where I divided up each label horizontally instead of vertically. So you have to play around with the column sizes a little bit on that to get that to work, but then this works exactly the same way. I did find a different website to make the QR labels, I believe, cognex.com on this one, but really there's a ton of these out there. All that you really have to have is a website where the URL for the barcode that's generated or the QR code that's generated contains the data that you put in. So put something recognizable in there and check the URL and see if that's something you can manipulate then. Setup on all of these takes a little bit of time, but hey, if you happen to have Avery labels, let's see, 5260, which use template 5160 for whatever reason, I'm going to put a link to this file, and I'll clean it up a little bit before I share it out with you so that you could just paste in your data and change your formatting a little bit, but have all the margins set correctly. May have to adjust a little bit for your printer, but hopefully it saves you a little bit of time. So hopefully that ends up being useful for you. It's going to save me a heck of a lot of time now that it's done. If you were looking for a science video and you got this instead, you're still watching, so I don't know, barcodes are your thing too, I guess. Science and barcodes, why not? Why not? But I do have plans to make some more science videos and put those up. I have some in the works already. Since I'm focused more on the data side of things, I have some more data videos that will be coming as well. So if you'd be interested in either of those categories, science videos or data videos from me, I'd encourage you to hit the subscribe button. And if you found this useful, be sure and give it a like as well. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.